I have decided to write another DBQ. I'm not really sure why, but you're welcome for my sacrifice. So, the College Board recently, I don't know how recently, but they released this sample question that actually is in the new format, finally. So, you can find it, it's on the College Board website. I just Googled AP World sample DBQ 2020, and this popped up. I also have not looked at this yet. I just skimmed it to make sure it was like a 5 doc DBQ, so I haven't looked at this yet. So what I'm going to do is I am going to put 45 minutes on the clock. Oof, I'm not excited about this. And I am going to write a DBQ. This is in no way going to be a 10 out of 10. Well, I don't know. Maybe it will be. But what I really want to do is just show you kind of how I would approach the DBQ. I want to show you kind of there you go, 45 minutes. Wait, let me stop. Hold on, pause. What you do and don't need to do to get points. I will try to kind of talk through what I'm doing so that you can kind of understand kind of what points I'm going for and all that good stuff. But I really just want to show you that you can be pretty efficient with these DBQs. You don't necessarily have to write, tons and tons and tons to get the points. You just have to know exactly what points you're going for and be really specific and efficient with your time. Okay, so 45 minutes. Let's do this. Oof. Okay. So this is the sample question, and they go through. Is this it? Is this the beginning? Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. So it looks like the prompt is evaluate the extent to which Indigenous peoples' reactions to state expansion differed during the period 1750 to 1900. Yay! I know this one already. So I'm already thinking Indigenous peoples' reaction to state expansion is like reactions to kind of imperialism, reactions to states growing. So this is probably going to be a lot of African and Asian leaders who are like, no, thank you. We don't want to be conquered by Europe or the United States or whatever. Cool. Okay. So now I'm kind of understanding what I'm looking for, and I'm going to just skim these documents. So this is an Ashanti leader. I know that the Ashanti Kingdom was in West Africa. Responds to a British offer of protectorate status. I am pleased to announce that we have arrived at the conclusion that my kingdom will never commit itself to any such policy. Great. So I have this DBQ worksheet that I've been using. I just kind of made it. I posted a copy on my website, antisocialstudies.org. And this is just what I kind of used the first time I wrote a DBQ to have the rubric right in front of me and have a way to keep the documents. So all I'm going to say is Ashanti refuse offer of British protection. Okay, that's what I get from that. All right. Document 2, the Something Proclamation to Soldiers and Civilians. Tonghat was a Korean, Neo-Confucian movement that called for a return to traditional Eastern learning and opposed foreign domination of the Korean state. Oh, okay. We, the Tonghat believers, had to raise our desire to exterminate the Japanese enemy, check the process of Western enlightenment, restore tranquility to the royal court, and secure peace for our nation. All right. Although we may differ in our religious faith, we are one in anti-Japanese and anti-Chinese sentiment. These words are addressed to you in order to dispel suspicion and to appeal to your patriotism. Okay, so I've never heard of this before, so that's kind of interesting. So this is like a Korean group wants to kick out Japanese and Western enlightenment. Okay, great. So emphasizing traditional values, that sort of thing. Okay. Document 3 is a painting, and it's the Ethiopian Battle of Adwa. The Ethiopians were victorious over the Italian troops. Great. So they forcefully kept them out. Awesome. So Ethiopia defeats Italy, doesn't get conquered. Document 4. Oh, I know who Queen Liliuokalani is. This is very exciting. Okay. I, the Queen of Hawaii, blah, 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 do hereby earnestly and respectfully protest against the assertion of ownership by the U.S. of the so-called Hawaiian Crown lands. Okay. I call upon the president and the national legislature and the people to do justice in this matter and restore to me this property. Great. I got lucky on that one because I teach U.S. history, and so I already know who that person is. Okay, so Hawaiian Queen, it's kind of like a diplomatic protest. She's not saying that she's going to wage war, but she's saying I respectfully ask that you stop stealing my land. Okay. That might be a good one for HIP too, because of like the language she's using and stuff. Okay, document 5. By the way, I'm good now. I could start writing my essay now. I just want to skim this document and see if it makes sense. So this is a Javanese aristocrat and pioneered education for women during the Dutch colonial period. Letters of a Javanese princess. Well, okay. Oh, this must be a woman. Okay, sorry. Sorry, the patriarchy is well ingrained in me. I just assumed it was a dude. Okay. There are many, yes, very many Dutch officials who allow the native rulers to kiss their feet and their knees. Kissing the foot is the highest token of respect. We do not find it. I don't like this document. I'm just not, I don't quite, I don't know anything about Java, and I'm looking at this and I'm already confused about the first few sentences, so I'm just going to use these 4. And that is strategy, y'all. If you get to one that you're like having to think too hard about, just don't worry about it. I'm going to make a note that I was maybe interested in like intended audience for this one because she's like writing a diplomatic letter. I also know a lot about Japanese expansion, so I might be able to like talk about the historical context for those. So this also, there's like a lot of respectful language. So again, I'm just making notes that I'll come back to later. What I want to do is I want to get, sorry, this is from an old DBQ, is that I want to get the basics down and make sure I kind of figure out what my argument is going to be before I worry about HIP and all that other stuff. So at this point, I'm going to go back and reread the prompt. I really emphasize that you should do this. So I'm evaluating the extent to which Indigenous peoples' reactions to state expansion differed. So what I'm basically going to argue is like essentially they all resisted state expansion, but some I want to see if there's like a violent, non-violent, but there's not really that Korean group. I don't know. I might just start with 3 documents and say, but some used violent methods while others took a more diplomatic route. So I actually just wrote my thesis. I wasn't really meaning to do that, but that's my thesis. So then my topic argument number 1 is violent methods, and I'm going to use document 3 of Ethiopia. And then my argument 2 is diplomacy, and I'm going to talk about document 1 and document 4. And I'm going to leave out document 2 for now, just because, again, I couldn't figure out a way for it to really fit into what I wanted to argue. To me, I want to pick a simple argument. So it's like they resisted, but like some were violent, some were not. If I can later figure out a way to add this one back in for that extra point, I will. But for now, I'm not going to worry about it. Okay. So at this point in my strategy, I'm just going to go ahead and write. I'm like, so I am 7 minutes in. I don't expect you to skim the documents quite as fast as I did, but maybe you'd be 10 minutes in. And so you can decide one of 2 things. You can either decide that you now want to kind of think through all of your outside evidence, think through everything, really organize it, and then write. I do a different strategy. I prefer to just get my basic ideas down, have the basic essay down, and then I go back and add things in. So I'll show you what that looks like. It's just the way my brain works. So I already have my thesis in it. I didn't mean to do that. So that is going to be my intro. I should just change it to Indigenous people all resisted state expansion, but some used violent methods while others took a more diplomatic route. Cool. And that in itself is kind of a complex thesis. I'm saying like there's some nuance there. They all did this thing, so they were similar in this way, but really they used different methods. And then I'm just going to talk about the different methods they used. So I can be really blunt about this. Some indigenous states, I don't think that makes sense, but violently resisted European expansion. For example, Ethiopia fought a war against Italy and successfully repelled their invasion. Document 3. I'm now done. I've used document 3. I want to be really clear here. Like, notice I didn't describe document 3. I didn't describe what was in the painting. I just used what I got from the painting. Ethiopia fought a war. They won. So that's my proof that there was violent resistance. That's it. I've used that document, right? You don't have to make it too complicated, right? If I want to get more complex later, I can explain like maybe why they won and how they won and those things. But for now, I've just used document 3. And like, honestly, I guess that's my first paragraph is two sentences. I'm going to go back and add stuff later. Okay. The second argument, God, that's ridiculous. Okay. Other states attempted diplomacy to resist conquest. In West Africa, the Ashanti leader respectfully declined the British offer of protection in exchange for becoming part of their empire. And that's document 1. So again, this is, I've already proved it, right? I'm sort of addressing the document. Like, it's clear that I understand what document 1 is saying. And I'm clearly tying it to my topic sentence. That's where having a strong topic sentence is really helpful, because the grader now knows what I'm arguing. They attempted diplomacy to resist. And then I just say, they respectfully declined this offer. So that's them diplomatically resisting, right? So now all of a sudden I have a thesis, and I've used 2 documents, and I have a 3, and I've only written 1, 2, 3, 5 sentences. Now, this is not ideal. Do not turn this in on test day, but I'm going to go back in and flesh this out later. Similarly, the Queen of Hawaii petitioned the U.S. Congress to repeal their annexation of the islands. Document. Okay, so I have kind of my basic stuff. Now I want to think about a few different things. I have 35 minutes left. Okay, now I can really, maybe this will be a 10 out of 10. I can really flesh this out. So the first thing is I want to go back in and think about context, because I like context. It comes pretty easily to me. This is the point in your essay when you would start going back into this rubric and thinking, okay, what other things can I do well? If the 4th document really makes a lot of sense to you, add that in. If HIP makes sense to you, you have outside evidence right off the top of your head, whatever. To me, context is the easiest one for me to do, so I'm going to do that one first. So what I really want to contextualize is one of 2 things. I either want to contextualize Indigenous people and like these indigenous states as they existed before. The easier thing is to contextualize state expansion. What do we mean? And what we really mean is imperialism, right? So I might do a few sentences on that. Throughout, what time period are we in? We're in, I need to look over here. We're in 1750 to 1900. Okay, so I'm going to say throughout the late 18th and the 19th centuries, many states, especially those that had industrialized or were industrializing, vastly expanded their power around the world, especially with European states. They created massive sea-based empires that they used as a launching point. I don't know, springboard, sure. A springboard for conquering the powerful states of Africa and Asia. However, many of these states were, what am I trying to say? What I'm trying to do here, so in my brain, I'm going, I kind of need to, I want to try to link in Indigenous people in some way. In an ideal world, I would bring in Indigenous people to this context. So say something like, however, as they expanded, they met Indigenous people who had long histories of their own, political and social. What am I saying? No, that doesn't make any sense. Ooh, I'm struggling with this one, to connect it to Indigenous people. However, as they expected, they met Indigenous people who, I don't know, I guess often did not want to be taken over or influenced by outside states. Okay, I think that's good enough. Again, that might be nitpicky, but I kind of like to have your context really kind of connect to all parts of the prompt. So I think that's good, though. That's good because it's specific. I talk about industrializing states. I talk about European states creating sea-based empires for conquering. I might go in and add, I really probably need 1 or 2 specific. So especially those that were industrializing and seeking access to raw materials and markets. Like, I'm going to go back in and kind of add some specific terms and specific ideas, so that I make sure I get that context point. If I'm spending 2 or 3 sentences on it, I want to make sure I get it. So I go back in and add, specificity wherever I can. Okay. So with that being said, I really need to flesh out these paragraphs. So Ethiopia fought a war against Italy and successfully repelled their invasion. So what do I know about Ethiopia? I know that they had been independent for a long time. I know that they were Christian. I know that they had been kind of isolated and they hadn't been taken over by the Muslims earlier. So there's a part of me that thinks I could maybe situate this document in its historical context, because I do know some stuff about Ethiopia and about this war. So if document 3 is in 1896, it's this battle in the Italo-Ethiopian War. What you're wanting to do for HIP is situate this document specifically in its historical context. So you can situate the painting, but really paintings are kind of hard. What I would do is just situate maybe this war and kind of this battle that's being shown. So I might talk about how Ethiopia had been the last holdout of the scramble for Africa, partly because they had been a unified state that isolated themselves for a long time. In addition, they were already Christian, so it was more difficult for Europeans to argue that they needed to civilize the Ethiopians. That might be outside evidence, but I'll come back to that in a second. No, it's not outside evidence. Okay. However, Italy was late to the colonial game because they were a new state. And so they attempted to take some of the African land that was left, but they were unsuccessful in the Italo-Ethiopian War. So what I've really done here is I've really situated document 3 in its historical context. So if this seemed a little bit quick, they just fought a war and they won, I'm really telling to the grader, no, I really understand this thing, right? I really understand what's being shown here. I understand what's going on. Why is it Italy and not Britain? Well, they were new. Why is Ethiopia one of the last ones trying to be conquered? And so in this way now I have really fully addressed the document, used it to support my argument, and situated it in its historical context to where the grader is going to feel really confident that I understood that document. So that's good. The reason why I said this wouldn't be I don't think would be outside evidence, although it depends on how nice the graders are going to be this year. You could bring up the scramble for Africa, but that's really context. That's hipping that specific document. But talking about they were already Christian, so it was more difficult for Europeans to argue they needed to civilize. If in a year where this DBQ prompt is maybe a harder one, they might give you that for outside evidence. But the reason why I don't think it is because it doesn't answer the prompt. It's just an extra fact. It's kind of like a fun fact. It doesn't answer about indigenous people's reactions to. It's more about European motivations. The European motivation of civilizing people didn't work in this instance. So it doesn't really answer the prompt, which is why I'm not confident that it's outside evidence. So I should add some in. Okay, but for now, that paragraph now looks less sad. So, okay, the Ashanti leader respectfully declined the British offer of protection in exchange for becoming part of their empire. So I know some stuff about this too. I know some stuff about Ya Ashantewa. So here's where I'm going to use the internet for a second because I'm not sure when she ruled. So I don't know if it was before or after this. So I'm going to really quickly Google Ya Ashantewa years. And she ruled, her birth, she's generally to be born, oh gosh, do we not know? The War of the Golden Stool was the one she was involved in, and Wikipedia is fine for this. Oh, 1900. Oh, so this, okay, interesting. So we know there's a war with Britain after this document is written. So here's a unique example of when you could actually situate the document in its historical context by talking about what's about to happen. Normally it's easier to say what has been happening, but this is a really interesting case where I knew that. I thought maybe she came before, But now I'm like, oh, I actually understand this document even better because we're from the future, right? And I understand that like, oh, this is not going to end well for the Ashanti. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in there as another HIP. So interestingly, this document was written just a few years before the War of the Golden Stool began between Britain and Ya Ashantewa. Clearly, the message of this document was not well received by the British, who were less interested in protecting the Ashanti and more interested in conquering them. Boom. Ooh, that's a good HIP, right? Because I'm saying like, ooh, I kind of understand this thing that's about to happen, and that's helping me better understand the document. I'm like, oh, so clearly the intended audience, the British, were like, no, you didn't understand. We weren't actually offering you protection. That was our polite way of saying, can we conquer you, please, right? And the Ashanti probably knew that too. They were like, politely decline. Okay, that's a good HIP. I feel really good about that one. So now I've really done 2 HIPs that I feel pretty good about. So I'm going to stop. Like, I'm not going to do more HIPs. If you feel confident about the 2 you've done, you only need 2 and you can't get bonus points. So don't spend time doing 2 or 3 more HIPs just in case. Now, if you have one that you're like, I'm kind of guessing on that one, then maybe add a 3rd one in if you have time. But now I'm going to focus on, I'm going to go back to my rubric. I feel pretty confident that I've done a thesis. I've addressed 2 documents, used 2 documents to support. I feel pretty good about my HIP and I feel pretty good about my context. So now I have a 6, which is very exciting. So now I got to really think about outside evidence or adding in that 4th document. I haven't thought about outside evidence yet, so let me try that. So what I want to think about, again, additional evidence is not just like more facts about the documents. Additional evidence is like other examples of Indigenous peoples' reactions to state expansion. And I got, y'all, Sepoy Mutiny, right? And that's great because I actually kind of needed another violent example. Like this paragraph was a little imbalanced. Like obviously it doesn't really matter, but that will be helpful to add this year. Boom. So the reason why the Sepoy Mutiny will work is because it still is within all the parameters of the prompt. It's Indigenous people, the Sepoys, reacting to state expansion, the British East India Company becoming more involved, and it's in this time period. So again, additional or outside evidence still has to fit all the parts of the prompt to count. So similarly, just a few decades earlier, the Indian people rebelled against the British, but they weren't as successful. Indian soldiers working for, this is where like I want to prove to them that I know what I'm talking about. If you just say Indian people rebelled, it's sort of like, it's still kind of vague. So I want to really prove to the grader that like for outside evidence that I really know what I'm talking about here. I'm not just kind of throwing a shot in the dark. Maybe they rebelled, right? Indian soldiers working for the British East India Company revolted in the Sepoy Mutiny in an attempt to get the company's influence out of the Mughal Empire. However, this backfired and the British government decided they needed to assume direct control to protect their economic interests. This is a really not lucky, but it's good because this is one where like I just knew a lot about that. That might be one that you've studied a lot. And so obviously if you didn't remember all of that, but you were like, oh, the Sepoy Mutiny would be good, you can go to the internet and kind of remind yourself, but you don't want to go down a rabbit hole of reading a bunch of stuff. So you might just be like, what was this called? What I'm telling my students is if you're going to use the internet, you shouldn't have to click on anything. So if you Google Sepoy Mutiny, you can read what it has here and you can read what it has in the little preview. And if you need more than that, then you don't really know what you're talking about. And you should just go back and work on your essay because you don't want to get caught reading a whole article about this and you run out of time. So again, if you didn't remember this stuff or you didn't remember what it was called, right, that's where the internet can be helpful. But otherwise, I would just focus on writing, focus on your essay. Okay, so I feel pretty good about that one because that, again, it supports my topic sentence. They violently resisted expansion. And I'm showing a little bit of complexity here. I don't get the complexity point, but I have some complexity where I'm saying, here's one that was successful, here's one that wasn't. Here's an opportunity for complexity, and I might make a note for myself. is like, why the difference? So I might like make a note for myself and highlight or bold this so that if I remember and if I have time, an opportunity for complexity is to explain why. If two states reacted the same way and had different outcomes, why? Why did it work for Ethiopia and not for India? And so if I have time, that could be a good chance to kind of earn some complexity points or the complexity point. Okay, but I need one more piece of evidence of like, oh gosh, an indigenous response to state expansion. And I mean, the Opium Wars, right? Like, wouldn't the Opium Wars be one? And I happen to know that there was like, because I've seen it in documents and DBQs before, that there was a letter from an official to Queen Victoria that was like, hey, please stop getting our people addicted to opium. But then they rebelled and fought a war. So, oh, jackpot. So that's a really good one because I can actually use that to maybe conclude and bring both my points together. Oh, this is gonna be a good essay. I'm very proud of this actually. Okay, good. In China, we see both of these responses occurring almost simultaneously. So this is the rare, like, you don't have to have a conclusion or you don't have to have a third body paragraph, but I see an opportunity here, right, where I'm arguing that there was violence and war and that there was diplomacy, and I happen to know an example that includes both. So to me, that's a really nice way to kind of wrap up my argument with my piece of outside evidence. So Chinese officials sent letters to Queen Victoria diplomatically asking her to halt the smuggling of opium into their country via the East India Company. And yes, you can use abbreviations if you feel confident they're going to know what you're talking about. So maybe right here, I should do East India Company and then put in parentheses EIC. And then if I'm going to talk about it later, I can just say EIC, right? However, when England did not stop, the Chinese government fought back in the Opium Wars. Similar to the Sepoy Mutiny, this backfired, and China came under the influence of European economic imperialism. Okay, so here's where I'm starting to notice, like, I'm putting in some little tidbits of complexity that I could flesh out if I have time. So saying things like this is similar to a thing I talked about before, just really saying, like, putting my two topic sentences together in this one example. So this might also be an opportunity for complexity if I have time. I have 18 minutes left. Let's see what I have. I feel pretty good. I feel pretty good about an 8. Now, you would not do this as quickly as me. So, right, that's only fair. So let's say I started out with 45 minutes. Let's say I want to give myself actually only, let's say 35 minutes. Let's say I cut out 10 minutes of my time. Because realistically, it's going to take you a little bit longer to, no, I'm not trying to insult anybody, but it's going to probably take you a little bit longer to skim those documents and to think through what you're going to argue and come up with outside evidence. So let's say let's cut 15 minutes off my time. So if I cut 15 minutes off my time and I give myself 30 minutes for the essay that y'all have 45 minutes for, that means I have 3 minutes left before I need to start uploading. That's still time to do something. I feel pretty confident about these 8 points. So I need to think about, do I feel like I could bring in this fourth document? I think bringing in a fourth document is faster than complexity. It would take me too long to really think through and explain like why these things were different. I also think I've done some stuff that could be complexity if the grader's feeling nice. So I kind of want to try to bring this back in. And so I have 2.5 minutes left. It's a Korean group. They want to kick out the Japanese and Western Enlightenment. I don't know if it's like diplomatic or violent. I'm just going to skim it again to remind myself. Where was it? Here we go. They raised the righteous army. Oh, I missed that. Okay, I missed that the first time. So this is the point, right? If you don't understand a document or like you do, but then you're not sure how it fits in, skip it for now, then come back. Because now coming back and knowing my argument, I hadn't noticed the army thing to exterminate the Japanese enemy. Boom. That's super easy now. I can go and add that to my violent paragraph, right? Let's see. I'll just add this to the end. This is where organization doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it would like flow better if it went after document 3. Just put it, like tack it on to the end of your paragraph. Not all states were resisting European expansion. In Korea, an indigenous group raised an army to expel the Japanese. Oh, or was it expel? No, it was exterminate. That's even worse. Okay, exterminate the Japanese. When did the Japanese conquer Korea? Here we go, Google. Japan conquer Korea year. Oh, wait, 1592. That's not what I'm thinking of. These are different invasions. Japan-Korea Treaty of 1910. Let's see if that's what I'm thinking of. That's when they annex in 1910. Okay, so again, that's going to happen. So who was beginning to expand its influence around the Pacific through its Japanese Colonization Society that I know because I just talked about that today in my cram session. There we go. Document, what was that one? Document 4. Okay, so here's what I feel pretty confident about. I've used all 4 documents. I think this is a 9. I think this is actually a 9 that could be a 10 on a good day, depending on how, the thing about complexity is like, there's some places where I could have gotten complex, like I might have gotten complexity. For one, I have a pretty complex thesis where I'm saying like they were similar, but then within that similarity, there was difference. I think a lot of really good HIP, like this is a pretty in-depth evaluation of like the historical situation. I also think I'm making a lot of connections where I'm saying like document 3 is similar to this piece of outside evidence, or document 4 that's where grouping documents can be helpful. If you're using the right words to kind of combine them together, that can become complexity if you do it enough. I'm also pointing out, however, this backfired. That's an example of sort of like irony or kind of an exception of like they wanted this thing, but then it backfired. And then I bring that back up later, similar to India, it backfired in China. So I think I've made enough connections across my different documents and points that like, depending on where they set the bar for complexity on this essay, I could in theory get that point, but I don't need it. I don't need to spend more time on it. So that for me is like the end of my 30 minutes, which I think is fair, right? To cut out about 15 minutes for me, because as a teacher and someone who's taught this class for a long time, obviously this stuff is going to come faster to me. I will say, just to ease some of your stress, this is a lot for HIP. This is a long HIP, but I really wanted to make sure it was clear that they really understood that I was like situating the document in its historical context. But I hope that you notice that like using the documents in a lot of ways is actually the fastest part. Because if you have a solid argument and a solid topic sentence, then you put the document into your own words. Don't quote the document if at all possible, because that doesn't get you any points. That's not you making any sort of argument. So I hope that you see that like you don't need a bunch of sentences. I think a lot of students still think that they need to like, after they talk about the invasion, they need to say there was a painting of the battle where we see Ethiopians. We don't need that. The reader knows what you're talking about. That's why you're citing document 3 at the end of that. You're saying, okay, if you want to know where I got that information from, go look at document 3. So again, when you're writing the DBQ on Thursday, you can assume that like for example, I'm going to be a grader. So I might be grading some of your essays. And if I'm grading, let's say it's this essay, you can write your essay knowing that I will know these documents. You do not have to like describe them in detail to me. You just have to pick out the facts. And so I have enough facts where I said they fought a war, which is violence, and they successfully repelled the invasion. They were violent against expansion from Europe, from Italy. That's enough to like tie that document to the topic sentence. It makes sense to the reader that it makes sense why that document relates. So again, don't spend a ton of time describing the documents. Pick out the evidence that you need from it and relate it to your arguments and your topic sentence, and then spend time kind of fleshing out your ideas. You notice how I'm kind of adding in some information here with my HIP, where it's also like helping the the reader understand that I really do get this document, right? They're all kind of tying together to where there's no reader that's going to read after this first sentence. They'll go, okay, cool. But then they read these other sentences and go, okay, I really believe her. She gets this document. She understands it. Same for some of these others. Okay, so that's it. That's my essay. I think I wrote a 9. I think I wrote a solid 9. So I will be, let me see, I'm going to be posting this. I kind of hesitate to post this online in case teachers are using this for some sort of assessment, but I will see. I'll think that through. If I post it online, it'll be for my Patreon subscribers. The reason why I post my sample essays that I've written for people who join my Patreon is just for security. So for example, if you're a student and you pay $1 and you go get my sample essay, I now have it documented that you joined my Patreon. And that way, if your teacher is like, I think they just copied this essay from the website, they can reach out to me and I can say, well, yeah, they did join my Patreon, so they probably did that. So for those of you who are like, please make them free, I mean, I made them $1, and that's why, is because I want to have some documentation of who is getting those essays that I'm writing so that you can't then go and pass them off as your own. Or if you do and someone catches you, they just have to talk to me. So anyway, that's why I don't have those up there just free on my website. So I will post that there under my kind of Patreon materials, but you have this video and you have the video, you just watched me write it. So you should be good. This worksheet that I made for myself is also up on my website. If this looks like a helpful tool for you to write your DBQ, what I would say is practice with it first. Don't use it for the first time on Thursday. But with that, I want to remind you of a few other materials. On my YouTube, make sure that you're subscribed. I've been going live with cram sessions. I'm going on Wednesday, the day before the AP test. I'm going live at 4/3 Central with an AMA, like ask me anything about the AP exam. And so I'll go through more of this rubric if you have questions about that. Make sure you're also following me on Instagram at Anti-Social Studies. That's really where I kind of communicate. Like YouTube is where I put a lot of like the content and the review, but Instagram is really where I communicate and like announce new things and new resources on my website and that sort of thing. And then finally, you can find a lot of resources on my website at antisocialstudies.org. Okay, that wasn't as bad as I thought. So y'all can do it too. You'll be fine. All right, bye.